Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the story. The rain had slowed by the time Mark walked back to his small apartment, but the cold still clung to him, settling deep into his bones. The weight of Eleanor's offer hung heavily in the air, more suffocating than the storm he had just walked through. He had barely been able to process what had just transpired. Marry her? A stranger? A businesswoman with no warmth in her eyes, only cold, hard logic? It sounded absurd. Yet, in his mind, the offer lingered, tempting in its simplicity. His father's debts weren't going anywhere. His mother's bills weren't getting paid. He needed a way out. And here it was. He arrived at his apartment building, its faded bricks a silent reminder of how far he'd fallen. Inside, the familiar smell of old carpet and cheap coffee filled his senses as he stepped into the dim hallway. His mother was in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background, though she wasn't paying attention to it. She was flipping through old photo albums, a quiet sadness in her eyes. "Mark," she called out, looking up as he walked in. "How was your day?" He forced a smile, shrugging off his jacket. "Just another day. You know how it goes." She eyed him, sensing something was off. "You don't look like you've had just another day. What happened?" Mark hesitated for a moment, glancing down at the worn carpet. He could tell her. He could tell her about Eleanor's offer. But how could he? How could he explain that he was even considering it? That he might marry a stranger just to clear his debts? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I got an offer today. A big one. From someone who wants to help." His mother's eyes lit up, but she didn't press. She knew he'd tell her when he was ready. "What kind of help?" she asked softly, concern lingering in her voice. "I'll figure it out," he said, his words vague. He wasn't ready to share the full details yet. Not until he knew what to make of it. After dinner, Mark sat down at the small kitchen table, the same table where he'd been making plans for his future, the future that seemed to slip further away with every passing day. The thought of marrying Eleanor for business? It sounded crazy. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he needed it. How much he needed a way out. Later that night, as the hours dragged on and the city outside remained quiet, Mark finally decided to call her back. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed Eleanor's number. When she answered, her voice was as calm and composed as ever. "Mark," she said, "I trust you've had some time to think about my offer?" "I have," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. I just need to know exactly what this would mean. I need to know what you expect from me, what the rules are." Eleanor's response was sharp and to the point, just like the woman herself. "It's simple, really. You will marry me, but it will be a contract marriage, not a real one. You'll attend events with me, help manage certain aspects of my business, and be there when I need you. There's no love involved, only respect and partnership. As for you, your debts will be paid, and you'll have financial security. I will take care of everything." Mark sat back in his chair, running his fingers over the worn wood. It sounded cold, clinical, but it also sounded like the only lifeline he had. "And if I don't do it?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "You'll continue to struggle. Your debts won't disappear. Your life will remain exactly as it is." The silence between them stretched out, filled with the unspoken weight of the decision. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What was the right choice? Could he really do this? Could he marry someone for a contract, for security, and walk away with his dignity intact? "I'll do it," he said finally, the words heavy in the stillness of his small apartment. "But I need to know one thing." "And what is that?" Eleanor asked, her tone still steady, but there was a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I need to know why you're doing this," Mark said. "Why me?" There was a pause on the other end, and for the first time, Eleanor's voice softened slightly. Because I need someone to stand by me. To help me maintain control of my legacy, and I think you're the kind of person who can understand that. Mark's mind raced as he processed her words. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for control. And in that moment, he realized that he, too, was looking for something more than just financial security. Maybe it was stability. Maybe it was the chance to feel like his life had meaning again. But whatever it was, he knew this wasn't just a business deal anymore. This was a choice. I'll marry you, he said, his voice firm now. But I won't be just your husband. I'll be your partner. Eleanor's response was a simple, good. And just like that, Mark's life shifted. He had made a decision that would change everything. The next day, he would meet her again, and things would begin to unfold. But for now, he was left to wonder what would happen when he walked into that new life. What would he find on the other side of this deal? The next morning, Mark stood in front of the bathroom mirror, his reflection staring back at him with uncertainty. He had just agreed to marry Eleanor, but the decision felt heavier now that it was real. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of it all. Was he making a huge mistake? Could he really go through with this? The thought of living a life based on a contract, a business arrangement, felt so foreign, so cold. But what choice did he have? He had promised his mother he would make things right. He had promised himself that he would do whatever it took to get out of the cycle of debt and desperation. This was his chance, a way out. Mark took a deep breath, adjusting his collar before heading out the door. When he arrived at the office building where he was supposed to meet Eleanor, he felt a knot in his stomach. The lobby was pristine, everything polished to perfection. The marble floors, the sleek glass windows, the subtle scent of expensive perfume in the air, it all felt so foreign to him. He had grown up in a small town, where things were simpler, where people were real. Now, he was standing in a world that seemed so far removed from anything he knew. As he stepped into the elevator, he tried to steady his nerves. The door slid open on the top floor, revealing a luxurious suite that looked like something out of a magazine. Eleanor was waiting for him, standing by a large wooden desk with papers scattered across it. She looked as composed as ever, her silver hair neatly styled, her outfit flawless. She glanced up as he entered, offering him a small but knowing smile. "You're here," she said. "I trust you're ready to move forward." Mark nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm ready," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed his own words. He had spent the entire night wrestling with his decision, but now that he was here, there was no turning back. Eleanor walked over to a large window, gazing out over the city. The view was breathtaking. Skyscrapers stretched as far as the eye could see, the city alive with energy. "This is what I want, Mark," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've spent years building this empire, but there's no one to share it with. No one I can trust. I need someone by my side, someone who can help me navigate the future." Mark looked at her, trying to understand. "But why me?" he asked again, the question that had been nagging at him since their first meeting. "Why not someone else? Why me?" Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes steady, unwavering. "Because you're not like the others. You don't see me as just a businesswoman or a wealthy woman. You see me as a person. That's rare, Mark. That's why." He swallowed hard. She had a point. So many people in her world saw her only for her wealth and power. But for the first time, he saw the loneliness behind her eyes, the desire for something real. It wasn't about money for her. It was about finding someone who could understand the weight she carried. "All right," he said, his voice steady now. "Let's do this. Let's move forward." Eleanor smiled, a hint of relief in her expression. "Good. We'll start with the basics, sign the papers, and then we'll begin preparing for the gala next week. This is where things will change." Mark looked at the papers she handed him. They were thick, filled with legal jargon, terms and conditions he barely understood. But he knew what it meant. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet fathom. As he signed the papers, a strange sense of finality washed over him. There was no going back now. He had made his choice, and whatever happened next, he would have to live with it. Later that evening, as Mark walked out of the office building and into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. His life had already been turned upside down, but now, with this contract marriage, he was stepping into a world that was entirely foreign to him. The promise of financial security, the chance to be free from his debt sit was all right in front of him. But deep down, he couldn't help but wonder, would this decision lead to a better life, or was it the beginning of something much more complicated? Only time would tell. Mark stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, feeling the weight of the decision he had made just days before. The gala was in full swing, the clinking of glasses and the hum of polite conversation surrounding him. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, courtesy of Eleanor's team. His tie felt too tight, the unfamiliar luxury of the event making him self-conscious. But it wasn't the dress or the setting that made him uneasy, it was the fact that he was standing here as Eleanor's husband, or at least, her contractual husband. He had promised to stand by her side for this event, to play the role she needed him to. But inside, he still felt like an outsider in a world that was far beyond his reach. Eleanor appeared beside him, looking every bit the part of the powerful CEO she was. Her silver hair was swept up perfectly, and her outfit was immaculate. As she glanced over at him, her eyes softened for a brief moment, but her expression quickly returned to its usual composed demeanor. "You look good," she said, offering a small smile. "You're fitting in better than I thought you would." Mark didn't know how to respond. He wasn't here because he wanted to be, but because he had no other choice. He had agreed to this contract, to this marriage, for financial security, nothing more. Yet, standing next to Eleanor now, he couldn't deny that there was something else he felt. Something he wasn't sure he could name. "Thank you," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's just get this over with." Eleanor chuckled softly, clearly sensing the tension in his voice. "You'll be fine. Just remember, you're here as my partner. You don't have to be perfect." But Mark wasn't sure he believed her. He was used to being the one who struggled in the background, not the one standing beside someone like Eleanor. She had built her empire from the ground up, and here he was, a law student who had barely managed to keep his head above water, now pretending to be part of that world. As the night went on, Mark found himself standing off to the side while Eleanor mingled with her business associates and other high-profile guests. She was the picture of grace, effortlessly navigating the conversation. Meanwhile, he felt out of place. The more he watched her interact with others, the more he realized just how much he didn't belong here. But then, something unexpected happened. Eleanor caught his eye across the room, her gaze locking with his. She excused herself from the group she was with and walked over to him, her steps confident but measured. "Mark," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "I need you for a moment." Without waiting for his response, she took his arm and led him through the crowd. They stopped near the edge of the ballroom, where the music was quieter, and the chatter of guests seemed distant. "You look like you're about to disappear," Eleanor remarked, her eyes scanning him with an intensity he had not expected. Mark shrugged, unsure of what to say. "I don't belong here, Eleanor," he admitted, his voice lower than usual. "I don't know how to fit in with these people." She tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You don't have to fit in. You just have to be yourself. Remember, this is our deal. You're here as my partner, and you're doing exactly what I need. No one here is judging you, Mark. Not as long as you hold your ground." Her words were unexpectedly reassuring, and Mark felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. Eleanor had a way of making everything sound simple, even when it wasn't. "I'm not good at this," he said quietly, looking down at his shoes. "This isn't my world." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch firm but gentle. "It doesn't matter," she replied. "You're exactly who I need. And that's all that matters right now." For the first time since agreeing to this contract, Mark began to feel something that wasn't entirely connected to duty or obligation. There was a warmth in Eleanor's words, a sense of genuine care that he hadn't expected from someone like her. But as quickly as the moment had come, it was gone, and Eleanor was back to her usual poised self. She straightened up and turned toward the crowd. "Come on," she said, her tone lighter now, "let's show them who's really in charge." Mark nodded, following her lead. They re-entered the ballroom, and for the rest of the night, he stood by her side, less a figurehead and more a partner. As the evening wore on, Mark couldn't help but notice that the distance between them seemed to shrink just a little. He wasn't sure where this new connection would lead, but for the first time since the contract had been signed, he began to think that maybe this deal, this arrangement, might turn into something more than he had ever imagined. The next morning, Mark woke up to the soft hum of the city outside his window. The glow of the early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. He sat up in bed, staring at the unfamiliar surroundings. It had been a week since he signed the papers, a week since he agreed to this marriage, and yet, it still felt surreal. He had spent the night tossing and turning, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers to. Was he really doing the right thing? Was this the life he had chosen for himself, or was it something that had just happened? He glanced at his phone. Eleanor had sent him a message. Gala went well. Let's talk tonight about our next steps. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Their arrangement was still new, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. They were partners, in every sense of the word, whether he was ready for it or not. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, Mark grabbed a cup of coffee and made his way to the office. Eleanor's office, to be precise. It had been a few days since the gala, and now it was time to discuss what came next. He was still processing the events of the night, how Eleanor had stood by him, reassured him, and even made him feel like he belonged. But could he really trust this new partnership? Could he trust her? When he arrived, the sleek glass doors of her office building loomed before him, a reminder of just how out of place he sometimes felt. Inside, the building was filled with high-powered people, walking briskly to meetings, their eyes focused on the next task. Mark made his way to the elevator, his nerves slowly starting to build. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, he was greeted by the familiar opulence of Eleanor's office. It was just as pristine as he remembered, but today, something about it felt different. He walked in, and Eleanor was already seated at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. "Mark," she said, her tone warm yet professional. "Come in, have a seat." She gestured to the chair across from her, and he sat down. She didn't waste any time. "We need to talk about our next steps. We've completed the first phase, attending the gala, making our presence known. Now it's time to start planning for the next big move." Mark nodded, unsure of what to expect. Eleanor was always so composed, so certain of everything. He felt like he was still learning the ropes, still trying to understand how to play this part in their arrangement. "I've been thinking," Eleanor continued, "about the direction I want this partnership to take. You've proven that you're reliable, and you've handled yourself well under pressure. But now, it's time to step it up. We need to begin working together on some of the bigger projects. I want you involved in my business decisions, helping with strategy, negotiations, and representation at high-profile meetings." Mark's eyes widened slightly. This was not what he had expected. "You want me to be part of the business? Like, officially?" Eleanor smiled, a hint of approval in her eyes. "Yes. You're no longer just a figurehead, Mark. You're my partner. And this partnership is about more than just appearing at events. It's about us working together, each bringing our strengths to the table." Mark paused for a moment, taking in what she had just said. It was one thing to be married on paper, to attend a few events together. But this? This was different. This was real, and it felt like a leap into a world he had never even dreamed of. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I mean, I barely know the first thing about running a business, about making decisions like that. How can I help with something this big?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze soft but intense. "That's why I'm here, Mark. I'm here to guide you, to teach you. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just need to be willing to learn, to step up when it matters." Mark looked down at his hands, unsure. He had come so far in such a short time. 1 week ago, he had been struggling to pay his bills, unsure of what his future held. Now, he was sitting across from a powerful woman, someone who could change the course of his life. "I'll try," he said finally, looking up at her with determination. "I'll do my best." Eleanor smiled, a flicker of approval in her eyes. That's all I ask. She sat back in her chair, tapping her fingers lightly on the desk. I know this is a lot, but we'll take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this, Mark. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt something other than fear. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the realization that he wasn't alone anymore. That, somehow, despite all the odds, he was building a future one he hadn't expected, but one that felt like it was finally within reach. The following week, Mark found himself sitting in a high-rise conference room, surrounded by a group of business professionals who spoke in terms that were still foreign to him. Eleanor had kept her word. She was guiding him through the world of business, step by step. Today, they were meeting with potential investors for one of Eleanor's newest ventures. Mark had been asked to sit in, to observe, and to understand the process. As he listened to the back and forth, the complex terms, and the sharp focus of everyone in the room, Mark felt out of place. He was still the law student, the kid who had barely made it through school, the one who had only recently agreed to this contract marriage. The world around him felt like a different universe, one where people made decisions that affected millions of dollars, where their words held power and influence. Eleanor, however, was in her element. She spoke with ease, commanding the room with her confident demeanor and sharp insights. Her presence was undeniable, and the way the investors listened intently to her every word left Mark in awe. He had seen her at the gala, seen her lead with authority, but watching her in action now was something else entirely. She was brilliant, focused, and Mark realized with a jolt she had become something more than just his contract partner. She was becoming someone he respected, someone he admired. After the meeting, Eleanor motioned for Mark to follow her. They walked down the sleek hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet space. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You did well today," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of approval. "I could see you were paying attention, taking it all in. That's what I need. Not just someone to sit at my side, but someone who can learn, who can contribute." Mark's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. He hadn't expected to feel this way. He had thought this whole arrangement would be cold, transactional, a way out of debt. But as he spent more time with Eleanor, as he saw the way she handled things, he found himself wondering if this might actually be more than just a business deal. Maybe there was something real here, after all. "Thank you," he said, his voice more confident now. I'm still getting used to all of this. It's a lot to take in." Eleanor smiled, a rare, soft smile that reached her eyes. "It's a lot for everyone, Mark. But you're doing well. You're learning quickly, and that's what matters." They continued walking in silence for a moment, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The pressure he had been feeling was starting to lift. He wasn't just pretending anymore. He was part of something. He was needed. And somehow, it felt good. Later that evening, as Mark returned to his apartment, his phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. We need to talk about the next phase of our plan." Mark's heart raced. Every meeting, every conversation, felt like another step closer to something bigger. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he couldn't deny that he was starting to feel invested both in the business and, strangely, in Eleanor herself. That night, they met at a quiet, upscale restaurant. The mood was different from the conference room earlier in the day. There was a sense of intimacy now, a rare moment where they were just two people, not partners in business, not contractually bound, but just two individuals with shared experiences. Over dinner, Eleanor was direct, as usual. "Mark, we're entering a crucial phase now. I want you to take on more responsibility. I'm counting on you to help with some of the upcoming negotiations. This is your chance to really step up." Mark looked at her, his mind racing. "You're sure I'm ready for this?" Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't think you were. You've got the drive, the intelligence. What you're missing is experience. And that, I can help you with." Mark took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had entered this arrangement thinking it was just a way to escape his past. But now, he was starting to see it differently. Eleanor wasn't just his business partner, she was his mentor, and perhaps, in ways he hadn't fully realized, more. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'm ready." Eleanor smiled, a slight curve of her lips, but her eyes held something deeper, something almost approving, almost kind. "Good," she said. "I knew you would be." As they finished their dinner, Mark felt the familiar weight of uncertainty lift from his shoulders. This wasn't just a contract anymore. It wasn't just a business deal. This was real. And for the first time in a long while, he was starting to believe that he could succeed not just for himself, but alongside Eleanor, in a world he was beginning to understand. With each passing day, he was becoming more than just a figurehead. He was becoming a partner. And maybe, just maybe, this partnership could lead to something even greater. Mark sat in the sleek conference room, his fingers tapping nervously on the polished wood table. Eleanor was on the other side, flipping through papers, preparing for the meeting that would determine the future of their latest project. It had been a month since their last big move, and in that time, Mark had come a long way. The business world, once a maze of confusion, was starting to make sense. Eleanor's guidance had shaped him, not just into a partner, but into someone who could contribute in a meaningful way. But today, things were different. The pressure was higher. This was a major deal, one that could change the course of the business. They were meeting with potential investors, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Mark could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight settling over the room. His heart was racing, his thoughts were scattered. What if he wasn't ready for this? What if he couldn't handle the responsibility? Eleanor glanced up at him, sensing his unease. Her eyes were calm, but there was a slight flicker of concern. "You okay?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with genuine care. Mark nodded, though he didn't feel as confident as he looked. "Yeah, just nervous," he admitted, his voice betraying him. He had always been good at pretending, but in moments like this, it was hard to hide his fear. Eleanor smiled reassuringly. "It's normal to feel that way. But remember, you've got this. You're ready. Just follow my lead, and we'll get through this together." Mark took a deep breath, nodding. "Right. I'll be fine." The door opened, and the investors walked in. The conversation quickly turned to business, with Eleanor leading the charge, confidently outlining their vision for the project. Mark sat back and observed, his nerves slowly easing as he watched her in action. She was in complete control, her words calculated but smooth, her presence commanding the room. Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. He had never seen anyone like her before, someone so assured, so powerful. And as much as he had told himself that this was just a business arrangement, there was a part of him that began to question if maybe, just maybe, it was something more. As the meeting progressed, Eleanor turned to Mark and subtly motioned for him to speak. It was his turn. His heart skipped a beat, but he stood up, clearing his throat. The room quieted as all eyes shifted to him. He had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, his mind went blank for a second. Thank you," Mark began, his voice steadying as he spoke. "As Eleanor mentioned, this project is about more than just financial success. It's about building something that will last, something that will truly make an impact." The words came to him easier than he had expected, and as he looked around the room, he saw nods of approval. He wasn't just talking, he was engaging, contributing to the vision that Eleanor had laid out so clearly. For the first time, Mark felt like he truly belonged at this table. He wasn't just following her lead, he was part of the conversation. After the meeting, as the investors left, Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "Well done," she said, her approval evident. "You handled yourself well in there." Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Thanks," he said, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "I actually think I did okay." "You did more than okay," Eleanor replied, her voice softening for a moment. "You were a key part of that. You're not just my partner on paper anymore, Mark. You're truly one of us." His heart skipped a beat. The words hit him harder than he had expected. He had been so focused on the business side of their arrangement, so focused on the contract, that he had forgotten about the emotional side of it. But hearing those words, hearing Eleanor tell him that he was truly part of the team, made him realize something. This wasn't just about money, or business, or survival. It was about connection. It was about being seen, being valued. As they walked out of the conference room together, Mark's steps felt lighter. For the first time since he had agreed to this partnership, he felt like he had truly earned his place. The world was still overwhelming, but it didn't seem quite as impossible anymore. He was no longer just the guy who had stumbled into this arrangement. He was someone who could stand tall, someone who was a part of something bigger. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the future. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Mark. He had officially stepped into the world of business, the world Eleanor had built. There was no turning back now. The meetings, the presentations, the high-level discussions, Mark had become part of it all. Eleanor was still his mentor, his guide, but now, he was starting to make his own mark. It wasn't easy. The pressure was intense, but with each passing day, he felt more confident, more capable. He had a new purpose. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about contributing, about building something real. But as the weeks went by, Mark began to feel the strain of the arrangement. The pressure of balancing the business world with his personal life was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't just the long hours or the never-ending meetings. It was the constant awareness of what this relationship had started as just a contract. A business deal. And while things were going well on the surface, there were moments when he found himself questioning what it all really meant. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Mark and Eleanor found themselves alone in the office, the city lights flickering outside the windows. Eleanor had stayed late to finish some paperwork, and Mark had stayed behind to help. They were sitting across from each other, a pile of documents between them, when Eleanor suddenly broke the silence. "Mark," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I've been thinking, I know we've always kept this professional, but I need to know, are you still okay with everything? With this arrangement?" Mark looked up from the papers, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to read her expression. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant for a moment. "I mean the marriage. The contract. You've done well, you've shown up, but I can't help but wonder if you started feeling like it's more than just business. Because, Mark, I don't want this to be something you're just going through the motions with." The weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. For the first time, Eleanor was acknowledging the elephant in the room, the emotional side of their arrangement. Mark swallowed, his mind racing. He had tried so hard to keep his feelings in check, to focus on the business side, to remind himself that this was just a contract. But the truth was, over time, it had become something more. He had started to care. He had started to feel something for Eleanor, something that went beyond professional respect. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't expect to care. But I do. This arrangement was supposed to be just about business, about getting out of my situation. But it's been more than that, Eleanor. I've learned a lot. About you. About myself." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, there was a vulnerability there that Mark hadn't seen before. "I didn't expect it either," she said quietly. "But I've come to rely on you, Mark. More than I thought I would. This partnership, it means more to me than just a contract." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment. The truth that had been lingering between them, unspoken, was finally out in the open. The realization that they weren't just partners in business anymore, that something had shifted, had changed. He looked at her, unsure of what to say next. "What does that mean for us?" he asked, his voice tentative. Eleanor smiled faintly, her gaze steady. "It means we're not just playing roles anymore. It means that whatever happens next, we'll face it together. We're partners, Mark. In every sense of the word." The words hung in the air, settling between them. It was a turning point, and Mark knew it. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was about something deeper, something real. And for the first time since he had signed that contract, he felt a sense of peace. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure: they were in this together. And that was more than he had ever expected when he first walked into this world. As the night stretched on, Mark found himself feeling a sense of clarity. This partnership was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, connection, and trust. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something even more than he had ever imagined. Weeks passed, and Mark found himself settling into a routine that, though still challenging, was beginning to feel more like his own. He and Eleanor had continued to work side by side, their partnership growing stronger with every project they tackled together. The tension that had once defined their relationship, built on the shaky foundation of a business arrangement, had slowly faded, replaced by something deeper, something undeniable. As much as Mark had tried to keep his emotions at bay, he couldn't deny the growing connection he felt for Eleanor. She had become more than just a business partner. She was someone he respected, someone he trusted, and slowly, someone he was beginning to care for in ways he hadn't expected. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Eleanor invited Mark to join her for dinner at one of their favorite quiet spots, a cozy restaurant tucked away from the city's usual hustle. The intimate atmosphere of the restaurant felt different now. It wasn't just business talk over a meal anymore. There was a change in the air, something lighter, as though the walls they had built around their professional lives were beginning to come down. They sat across from each other, the dim lighting casting shadows on their faces. The soft clink of silverware and quiet hum of conversation from other tables created a peaceful backdrop for the moment. Eleanor's gaze was steady as she looked at Mark, but there was something more in her eyes now, something warmer. She smiled gently, her voice softening as she spoke. "Mark," she said, her tone careful, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking. These past few months they've changed a lot of things, haven't they?" Mark looked at her, his heart pounding slightly in his chest. He had known this conversation was coming. He had felt the shift, the way their connection had deepened, but hearing her acknowledge it out loud made everything feel more real. "Yeah," he replied quietly, his voice steady. "They've changed everything." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time, she reached across the table, her hand resting gently over his. It was a simple gesture, but it held so much weight. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think I'm glad we did this," she continued, her voice full of sincerity. "This partnership, this arrangement. It wasn't what I expected, but somewhere along the way, it became something more. Something that actually feels real." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had heard the words, but it took a moment for them to sink in. "I'm glad too," he said, his voice low and honest. "I never thought it would turn out this way. I thought it was just a way out, a deal to fix everything. But I found something more here. Something I wasn't looking for." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently, her gaze never leaving his. "And I didn't expect to find someone I could trust the way I trust you. You've been more than just a partner to me, Mark. You've been a friend. And that's rare for me." Mark smiled softly, his heart swelling with emotion. He had always thought of Eleanor as a figure of power and control, someone who had everything figured out. But now, sitting here with her, he realized just how much they had both grown, how much they had shared, even without realizing it at first. This had started as a business deal, but it had become something far more profound. "I don't think it's just about trust anymore, Eleanor," Mark said, his voice quiet but filled with certainty. "I think it's about something deeper than that. Something real." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she spoke again, her voice soft and steady. "Mark, I never wanted this to be just about business. I wanted it to be something that could grow, something that could evolve. And it has. It's more than a contract now, isn't it?" Mark nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, it is. It's real." In that moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. It wasn't about the contract anymore, or the business, or the deal they had struck. It was about two people who had found something unexpected, something precious in the most unlikely of places. They had found trust, respect, and against all odds love. As the night continued, the conversation shifted, and for the first time, they spoke not as business partners, but as two people who had found a shared understanding. Eleanor and Mark were no longer just playing roles, they were building something that was truly theirs. And for the first time since this all began, Mark felt a sense of peace. Whatever the future held, he knew that it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, together.